Macy. You're the son.
All right. It can stare at me. That's fine. All right, here we go. Chapter 6. When we left off, Billy was in the cave and a mountain lion had been prowling around all night long, but he wasn't scared because that mountain lion didn't stand a chance against 2 vicious hounds and a big hunter.
Vicious.
Yeah. Really? I'm picturing 2 adorable little puppies like hopping around, like doing like that little thing where puppies hop kind of sideways and crooked and all wiggly. Yeah, they're not ferocious at all. That lion would like eat him in a gulp. But anyway, I'm glad that Billy thinks he's big stuff and that he could take out a lion.
That is not true.
Here we go, chapter 6.
That's so true on so many levels.
Keep on dreaming, Billy.
After the terrifying night, the bright morning sun was a welcome sight. I fixed breakfast and soon we were on our way. I tried to get the pups to follow me so as to lighten my load. They would for a way, and then sitting down on their rears, they would cry and whimper. Back in the sack they would go with their heads sticking out of the holes and their long ears a-flopping. I moved on. About midday, I entered country I knew. I wasn't far from home. I dropped down out of the mountains into the bottoms, far above the place I had crossed the river on my way to town. Staying on the left of the river, I followed its course past several campgrounds, but didn't stop until I came to one where I'd found the magazine. Here I took the pups out of the sack and sat down in the warm sand. As the afternoon wore on, I sat there deep in thought. I was trying to think what I was going to tell my mother and father. I could think of nothing. Finally, I decided I would just tell them the truth, and with the help of the new overalls, cloth, and candy, I would weather the storm. My pups were having a big time playing. With their little front paws locked around each other, they were growling, rolling, and chewing on one another. They looked so cute, I laughed out loud. While I was watching their romp, and the thought came, I haven't named them. I went over the list of names. For him, I tried Red, Bugle, Lead, name after name as before. For her, I tried Susie, Mabel, Queen, all kinds of girl names, none seemed to fit. Still mumbling names over and over, I glanced up. There, carved in the white bark of the sycamore tree, was a large heart. In the center of the heart were 2 names, Dan and Ann. The name Dan was a little larger than Ann. It was wide and bold. The scar stood out more. The name Ann was small, neat, and even. I stared unbelievingly, for there were my names. They were perfect. I walked over and picked up my pups. Looking at him, I said, your name is Dan. I'll call you Old Dan. Looking at her, I said, your name, little girl, is Ann. I'll call you Little Ann.
Hey, that's my dog's name.
That's your dog's name, Ann?
My grandpa actually.
It was then I realized it was all too perfect. Here in this fisherman's camp, I had found the magazine and the ad. I looked over at the old sycamore log. There I had asked God to help me get 2 hound pups. There were the pups rolling and playing in the warm sand. I thought of the old KC baking powder can and the fishermen, how freely they had given their nickels and dimes. I looked up again to the names carved in the tree. Yes, it was all there like a large puzzle, piece by piece, each fit perfectly until the puzzle was complete. It could not have happened without the help of an unseen power. I stayed at the campground until dark. I knew I had to go home, but I put it off as long as I could. The crying of the pups telling me they were hungry made up my mind for me. I knew the time had come for me to face my mother and father. I sacked up my dogs and waded the river. As I came out of the bottoms, I could see the lamplight glow from the windows of our home. One of the small yellow squares darkened for an instant. Someone had walked across the floor. I wondered who it was. I heard Daisy, our milk cow, moo. I was thinking so hard of what I would say, it startled me for a second. Reaching the gate to our house, I stopped. I had never thought our home looked very pretty, but that night it looked different. It looked clean and neat and peaceful, nestled there in the foothills of the Ozarks. Yes, on that night, I was proud of our home. My bare feet made no noise as I crossed the porch. With my free hand, I reached and pulled the leather that worked the latch. Slowly, the door swung inward. I couldn't see my father or sisters. They were too far to the right of me. But my mother was directly in front of the door, sitting in her old cane bottom rocker and knitting. She looked up, and I saw all the worry and grief leave her eyes. Her head bowed down. The knitting in her hands came up to cover her face. I stepped inside the room. I wanted to run to her and comfort her and tell her how sorry I was for all the worry and grief I'd caused her. The booming voice of my father shook me from my trance. He said, "Well, what have you got there?" Laughing, he got up from his chair and came over to me. He reached out and took the sack from my shoulders. "When we started looking for you," he said, "I went to the store and your grandpa told me all about it. It wasn't too hard to figure out what you'd done, but you should have told us." I ran to my mother and dropping to my knees, I buried my face in her lap. As Mama patted my head, I heard her saying in a quavering voice, "Oh, why didn't you tell us? Why?" I couldn't answer. Between sobs, I heard the squeals of delight from my sisters as they fondled my pups. I heard my father say, "What's this other stuff you've got?" Without raising my head from my mother's lap, in a choking voice, I said, "One's for you, one is for Mama, and the other's for the girls." I heard the snapping of string and the rattle of paper. The oohs and ahs from my sisters were wonderful to hear. Papa came over to Mama. Lying the cloth on the arm of her chair, he said, "Well, you've been wanting a new dress. Here's enough cloths to make half a dozen dresses." Realizing that everything was forgiven, I stood up and dried my eyes. Papa was pleased with his new overalls. My sisters forgot the pups for the candy. The light that was shining from my mother's eyes as she fingered the cheap cotton cloth was something I will never forget. Mama warmed some milk for the pups. They drank until their little tummies were tight and round. As I ate, Papa sat down at the table and started talking man talk to me. He asked, "How are things in town?" I told him it was boiling with people. The wagon yard was full of wagons and teams. He asked if I'd seen anyone I knew. I told him I hadn't, but the station master had asked about him. He asked me where I had spent the night, and I told him about the cave and the Sparrowhawk Mountains. He said that must have been one called Robber's Cave. My youngest sister piped up, "Did you stay all night with some robbers?" My oldest sister said, "Silly, that was a long time ago. There aren't any robbers there now." The other one put her nickel's worth in. "Weren't you scared?" "No," I said. "I wasn't scared of staying in the cave, but I heard a mountain lion scream and it scared me half to death." "Oh, they won't bother you," Papa said. "You had a fire, didn't you?" "Yes," I said. He said, "They'll never bother you unless they're wounded or cornered, but if they are, you'd better look out." Papa asked me how I liked town. I said I didn't like it at all and wouldn't live there even if they gave it to me. With a querying look on his face, he said, "I'm afraid I don't understand. I thought you always wanted to go to town." What does querying look
Is that one of our
mean?
vocab
What do you
words?
think of querying? Confused? Sophie, what do you think?
Are these one of our vocab words? Obviously.
Probably. No.
Obviously.
Yeah. Yes, it is. One of your vocab words. What do you think querying means?
I know what it
DJ, what's it mean?
is. It's another word for question, like you say, he queried.
Yes, so query is another word for question or ask. So if he's got a querying look, he's kind of like a questioning look on his face. Like, "I thought you always wanted to go into town." Kind of like questioning somebody, okay? All right. "I did," I said, "but I don't want to anymore. I don't like the people there and I couldn't understand them." "What was wrong with them?" he asked. I told him how they'd stared at me and even laughed and made fun of me. He said, "Oh, I don't think they were making fun of you, were they?" "Yes, they were," I said. "And to beat it all, the boys jumped on me and knocked me down in the dirt. And if it hadn't been for the marshal, I would have taken a beating." Papa said, "So you met the marshal. What'd you think of him?" I told him he was a nice man and he'd bought me a bottle of soda pop. At the mention of soda pop, the blue eyes of my sisters opened wide. They started firing questions at me, wanting to know what color it was, what it tasted like. I told them it was strawberry and it bubbled and tickled when I drank it, and it made me burp. The eager questions from my three little sisters had had an effect on my father and mother. Papa said, "Billy, I don't want you to feel badly about the people in town. I don't think they were poking fun at you anyway, not like you think they were." "Maybe they weren't," I said, "but I still don't want to ever live in town. It's too crowded and you couldn't get a breath of fresh air." In a sober voice, my father said, Someday you may have to live in town. Your mother and I don't intend to live in these hills all our lives. It's no place to raise a family. A man's children should have an education. They should get out and see the world and meet people. I don't see why we have to move to town to get an education. He said, hasn't Mama taught us how to read and write? There's more to an education than just reading and writing, Papa said, much more. I asked him when he thought we'd be moving to town. Well, it'll be some time yet, he said. We don't have the money now, but I'm hoping someday we will. From the stove where she was heating salt water for my feet, Mama said in a low voice, I'll pray every day and night for that day to come. I don't want you children to grow up without an education, not even knowing what a bottle of soda pop is or ever seeing the inside of a schoolhouse. I don't think I could stand that. I'll just keep praying, and someday the good Lord may answer my prayer. I told my mother I had seen the schoolhouse in town. Again, I had to answer 1,000 questions from my sisters. I told them it was made of red brick and was bigger than Grandpa's store, a lot bigger. There must have been at least 1,000 kids going to school there. I told her all about the teeter-totters, the swings made out of log chains, the funny-looking pipe that ran up the side of the building, and how I had climbed up in it and slid out like the other kids. I didn't tell them how I came out. I think that was a fire escape, Papa said. Fire escape, I said. It looked like a slide to me. Did you notice where it made that bend up at the top, he asked. I nodded my head. Well, inside the school, there's a door, he said. If the school gets on fire, they open the door. The children jump in the pipe and slide out to safety.
Why don't we have that?
Because we don't have a 2-story building. You don't need to slide out. You're like on the ground level. But think about this. If you were at a school that had a 2nd story, how would they get out if like the stairs were on fire?
Yeah, we have one. And
one of my old
elevators. Like, especially back then. Then that's how they made fire escapes.
Yeah. At Peevely, where I used to teach, the 1st and 2nd grade is a 2-story level. 1st grade's kind of down, but 2nd grade is an upstairs, and it's just one hallway that has an upstairs and a downstairs. And that was something that we always talked about, like us teachers, like every time we did fire drills, like what happens to 2nd grade? Like, because it's too high off the ground for them to like jump or crawl out of a window. They're just like little guys. Yeah, they would. I mean, here's the deal. That's better than knowing you're going to burn up having a broken leg. But can you imagine having to like jump out of a window from a 2nd story?
Just have a trampoline down on the ground.
Let's just put a trampoline in there. Anyway, so I mean, at a place like that, it would make sense to have a fire escape like that. And just don't worry, we're going to go down the slide, guys.
Let's go have fun when there's a fire on the.
Yeah, let's hurry up and go slide. Don't worry about that fire behind you.
It won't hurt you.
About just choked on my coffee. Okay, here we go.
Is it Starbucks or Dunkin'?
It's Dunkin' Donuts coffee that I made at home. I have Dunkin' Donuts coffee that I brew at home. Yeah. Okay. Boy, well, inside the school there's a door. The children jump in the pipe and slide out to safety. Boy, that's a keen way of getting out of a fire, I said. Well, it's getting late, Papa said. We'll talk about this some other time. We'd better get to bed as we've got a lot of work to do tomorrow. My pups were put in the corn crib for the night. I covered them with shucks and kissed them goodnight. What are shucks?
Blankets.
Fiona, what are shucks?
Shucks, it's like the outside of like the corn, and I guess they use that like a blanket.
Yeah, kind of like the outside pieces of corn. Like when you peel an ear of corn, those are the shucks. And then, yeah, they could have just piled them on like a blanket. Okay. Kissed them goodnight. The next day was a busy one for me. With the hamper and help of my sisters, I made the little doghouse. Papa cut the ends off his check lines and gave them to me for collars. With painstaking care, deep in the tough leather, I scratched the old name, Old Dan, on one and Little Ann on the other. With a nail and a rock, 2 holes were punched in the end of each straps. So he literally took like just a nail and a big old rock and used it like a hammer to punch a hole in the leather pieces. I put them around their small necks and laced the ends together with baling wire.
Why wouldn't they just use the thread? Because the boy.
He had to punch a hole in it.
I know, but didn't they?
A needle would have been too thin to push through leather. Leather's too thick, and just a regular needle won't go through it.
I said, he bought all that stuff for the mom, like lots of yarn. It was.
Fabric.
Well, yeah, fabric. Why wouldn't the mom just make collars out of that?
You don't make a collar out of fabric; it would rip too easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why you make leather.
Yeah, no, you make a collar out of like leather or like they didn't have the kind of like there are cloth collars now, but they're like a really heavy type of cloth. They're not like cotton cloth, which is what they had back then. They're like I don't know, a mesh type stronger material. And they didn't have that back then. Okay, anyway. So we made them leather collars, punched the holes in the straps. Do what, Zeke?
And there's collars made out of rope.
Yeah, you could do that. No. I put them around their small necks and laced the ends together with baling wire. That evening, I had a talk with my mother. I told her about praying for the two pups, about the magazine and the plans I had made. I told her how hard I had tried to find names for them and how strange it was finding them carved in the bark of a sycamore tree. With a smile on her face, she asked, "Do you believe God heard your prayer and helped you?" "Yes, Mom," I said, "I know he did, and I'll always be thankful." All right, end of chapter 6. Thankful for pups and all of that. Okay. Hang on. Pause. Hang on. Nope, keep that at your desk right now. Why did everybody just start talking all of a sudden? All right. Okay. Today. Oh, Cam. Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering, do we have a worksheet today? Because I didn't get anything on Seesaw.
You didn't? Oh, I can fix that.
I didn't
Okay.
either. I don't see anything.
Okay. All right. Give me 2
Do we
seconds.
do the worksheet? Once
There
we
is a
get it?
worksheet. Yes, I'm going to have you do it. Hang on a moment.
You completely forgot about the dog in the beginning.
You did?
Billy, you completely forgot about the dog.
Okay, guys, hit refresh. You should have it. And yes, that's what I want you guys working on right now.
Miss Beth, do you want me to pass them out?
Yes, please. And then